If you're a visitor today, we want to say welcome. I have realized that how often it's a difficulty walking into a church if you're visiting a place, and how often you feel like you're the only one that feels maybe like they don't belong or they're on the outside or whatever. If you're feeling that, that is a normal feeling, and we want you to know that whatever got you here, whatever brought you here, however you arrived, you're welcome. You belong in this place. And our class, The Crossing, is attempting to look at our spirituality in a different way. We're attempting to really not just know the gospel and the sacred text of the Bible, which I think is very important, but often our spirituality stops there. And when the stuff hits the fan, when we come up against things that are too big for us, that often it's our religion that we return to, but our religion has formed us often in a first stage of life. And it leaves us there. And so we're attempting to say, what does it mean to believe? What does it mean to practice? What does it mean to move into a spirituality that really matures and allows us to mature? And I'll say this all the time. If what we believe at 15 is the same thing we believe at 50, you have not grown. You have not grown. And so what we want to say is that there is perennial ways of believing. And belief is not something we stick in our head. It really is the practices that we end up living out together, right? And so, and that I think necessitates a different capacity for our relationships and for our connections and all those things. And so belief says get the information down. Spirituality, in the words of Christ, is an invitation to become vulnerable in the places that often scare the crap out of you. The things that we have deep defenses towards. That's the place where we change and transform. Transformation does not happen to you. We participate in it, and it's often a really undignified process, right? So if you really care how you look in front of people, religion's a great thing. If you want to change the very structure of the way that you act and react, spirituality will wreck your life. And it'll put it back together, and it'll wreck your life, and it'll put it back together, and it'll wreck. So what we're attempting to do in here is to say to our friends next to us, you look beautiful. How screwed up are you, though, right? Both of those things are true, right? I mean, but those are true. Most of us in this place kind of come into these spaces saying, if I look good enough, no one will have to ask me the questions, how screwed up are you, though, right? And we're joking with this, but also at the same time saying that's really true. Each of us are messed up. Each of us are broken. Each of us carry trauma with us. And it's in this place, in relationships that we have with each other, in vulnerability, that we're discovering, oh, this is a new way of holding belief. Not in my brain as a way of protecting me, but in my body as a way of summoning me into a new journey. And we find Christ on that journey all the time. Today, Sarah Barnett is going to teach today, and so I just want to turn this over to Sarah. So let's all give Sarah
Good morning. I'm excited to be with y'all. I will do a shameless plug for the restoration team, not the recovery team. They do have an event on Tuesday night, and I just want to share, because all we've said is that it's a fundraiser. It's a trivia night, so if you have anything competitive in you, like I do, make sure you're there, because it's awesome. And I think it's going to be at Pitch 25. Is that correct? Yeah, Pitch 25. So it's a cool venue, cool place to be. The other thing is, just like what Matt was just saying, last week after he shared with us, I came up and shared some thoughts with him afterwards, and now I'm here. So a word of warning to you. I know a lot of you like to talk to him afterwards. Just be careful, because it could have an invitation attached to it. But while he was teaching last week, the thing that kept coming back up in my mind was this idea that we can't think our way into a new way of acting. We have to act our way into a new way of thinking. And this is something that I believe comes out of a lot of AA work, but I came across it through a leadership principle that was talking about just in jobs and leaderships with the idea of an imposter syndrome. Like there's this concept of I'm not there yet, or I can't do that thing, or until I fully understand it, have my mind wrapped around it, I can't step into XYZ role, I can't do this thing, I can't live into faith in this way. And really, you have to start acting your way into it. There's not a time that we're going to be sitting there and think, well, there may be a time, but I have all of Christianity figured out, so I'm good now. I can now start living it. If that is our mindset, like what Matt just said, we're not really there. We haven't. You have to start acting your way into a new way of thinking, and it starts to become more natural. It starts to become part of your everyday. You start to embody it in a whole different way, and it does. It wrecks your world over and over again, and rebuilds it, and wrecks it, and rebuilds it. And it's continually throughout that process getting closer to God, getting closer to a faith that is really lived out in tangible ways. And the other thing that kept circling in my mind is that I think when we talk about grace, it has to be experienced and witnessed. I think there's something about grace that's really hard to understand if you're trying to wrap your head around it theoretically. And until you see it lived out, until either you are a recipient of that unmerited grace of God, or until you see somebody's life that you know personally transformed by it, it's really hard to wrap your mind around it. It has got to be experienced and witnessed. And so as I was thinking about those things, one of my comments to Matt last week was, I think that's why Jesus is in public so much. When he's doing miracles, when he's having hard conversations, when we see transformation, because the community has to be a part of that. There has to be a testimony and a witness. There has to be other people that are seeing it, this transformation take place. And then it kind of starts getting this contagious effect that starts to spread, that people start to talk about it, to talk about the change they've seen in somebody they know because of this guy named Jesus. So the story that I want us to, the scripture passage that I want us to dive in today is the woman at the well. And it's really long, so I'm just going to read it because I felt really bad asking anybody to read this long one. But what I want you to know going into this passage is that Jesus is traveling with his disciples, and they're on their way to Jerusalem, and they're going to go through Samaria. Jesus has made it clear we're going through Samaria. And the thing that you need to know is that no good Jew would ever have gone through Samaria. So Samaria is actually a straight line traveling-wise, right? It is the most direct path. If you are all about your short time from A to B, that's the route you're going to go. But the culture at the time, the Jews would have gone like drastically out of their way to avoid Samaria because it would have been considered unclean for them. It would have been considered people we don't interact with. There's a long history there between these two people, but there would have been zero interaction. And Jesus says, we're not going around. We're gonna go right through. The other thing I want you to keep in mind when we start reading this passage is that it's high noon. So it's hot. There aren't really people around during this time. And at the beginning of our passage, Jesus is sitting by a well at high noon. And this is what it says from John 4. It says, a Samaritan woman came to draw water. And Jesus said to her, give me a drink. His disciples had gone into the city to buy food. The Samaritan woman said to him, how is it that you, a Jew, ask a drink of me, a woman of Samaria? Jews do not share things in common with Samaritans. Jesus answered her, if you knew the gift of God and who it is that is saying to you, give me a drink, you would have asked him, and he would have given you living water. The woman said to him, sir, you have no bucket, and the well is deep. Where do you get that living water? Are you greater than our ancestor Jacob, who gave us this well with his sons and his flock drank from it? Jesus said to her, everyone who drinks this water will be thirsty again. But those who drink of the water that I will give them will never be thirsty. The water that I will give them will become in them a spring of water gushing up to eternal life. The woman said to him, sir, give me this water so that I may never be thirsty or have to keep coming here to draw water. Jesus said to her, go, call on your husband and come back. The woman answered him, I have no husband. Jesus said to her, you are right in saying I have no husband. For you have had 5 husbands, and the one you have now is not your husband. What you have said is true. The woman said to him, sir, I see that you are a prophet. Our ancestors worshipped on this mountain, but you say that the place where people must worship is in Jerusalem." Jesus said to her, "Woman, believe me, the hour is coming when you will worship the Father, neither in this mountain nor in Jerusalem. You worship what you do not know. We worship what we know, for salvation is from the Jews. But the hour is coming and is now here when the true worshipers will worship the Father in spirit and truth. For the Father seeks such as these to worship him. God is spirit, and those who worship him must worship in spirit and truth." The woman said to him, "I know that Messiah is coming, who is called Christ. When he comes, he will proclaim all things to us." And Jesus said to her, "I am he, the one who is speaking to you." Just then his disciples came. When they were astonished that he was speaking with a woman, but no one said, "What do you want?" or "Why are you speaking with her?" Then the woman left her water jar and went back to the city. She said to the people, "Come and see a man who told me everything I have ever done. He cannot be the Messiah, can he?" They left the city and were on their way to him. Jesus is sitting next to this well, waiting for his disciples to return when this woman approaches and asks her for a drink of water. This interaction should never have happened. A Jewish man, a man asking a woman for water, like this wouldn't have happened in society. A Jewish man asking a Samaritan woman would never have happened. There's too many cultural barriers in this place for this conversation to exist. And yet, Jesus steps into this and begins a conversation with her. The other thing that really stands out with me every time I read and come across this passage again is that it's high noon. And that seems like the worst possible time to ever be traveling to a well to get water. Because when I say traveling to a well to get water, I don't mean it's just for like one drink and that it's nearby. This would have been a mile journey outside of town, and she would have been filling a jar of water for her to use for her water supply for the next several days. And she has chosen at high noon to carry her empty jar down there, fill it, and then carry it back. I cannot even begin to imagine how heavy this thing is. There's no way I would have wanted to do it. I especially would not have wanted to do it at noon with the sun shining down. And so there's something else going here. The other thing that strikes me is I feel like this would have been a communal event. Right? If women are going to be traveling down to get water, there probably would have been a bunch of women in town traveling together in the evening to gather their water, to catch up with one another, to hear stories about what's going on in town, to share the happenings in their household, to share what they're struggling with, what they needed. But she's here alone getting her water at noon. And it just strikes me that something more is happening. And as she continues this interaction with Jesus, her response to him right off the bat is, "How can you ask me for a drink?" And when I read that, for me, I feel like all of her defenses are up. That she's a woman alone approaching, and so I try to think about what would it be like for me to approach any area as a female with one male sitting next to where I'm going. And the defenses that I may have up, if it's an area that I'm maybe not familiar with, maybe I'm really familiar with, but it's a stranger, it's someone I don't know, and what would have been going through my head? Why is he there? How am I going to get my water with as little interaction with him as possible? Do I need to be worried about my safety? Am I okay? What does this guy know about where he is? What's about to unfold? What kind of interaction am I going to have? And then heaven forbid if she's an introvert on top of, right? Like, I like people, but if you're introverted as well, walking up on a stranger and you know there's going to be an interaction because people are chatty, right? So I feel like these defenses are up. She has zero interest in helping him when she initially walks up. But I also imagine that Jesus knows this, and so that his questions and tone is probably like something you would use to soothe a child when they're really upset. Or a dog that's wounded, an animal. So he's like, "Hey, can you get me a drink of water?" Right? That he changes everything in his demeanor so that he's non-threatening. He's the least anxious presence in this. And Jesus shares that if she knew who he was, she'd be asking him for a drink of living water. Again, her defenses are up a little bit. I imagine that if we were writing it today, the response would be something along the lines of, instead of you don't have a bucket to use, it would be like, you literally have nothing to draw water with. You don't have any tools for this. How are you asking, how are you going to go about this? But she also starts to ask some questions of Jesus. Jesus continues to tell her that unlike this water, when you've had the living water, you will never thirst again. And that catches her attention because, boy, I bet she would love to never make this journey to the well at high noon again. So yes, if you can get me living water, AKA maybe indoor plumbing would be, how we interpret it. She's on board for it. Like, yes, I'm all about that. She would love to not have to keep coming back, which again brings me back to this question of, so why is she here? Why is she here at high noon if this is the least desirable time and she does not want to be making this journey? Jesus tells her to go and get her husband, and she tells him she has none. And he then begins to share her entire history with her, to tell her all the things that she already knows. And now it makes sense why she's there at noon. To be a woman divorced, especially a woman divorced that many times in this culture, would have made her a social outcast. She would have been cut off from everyone in her community, completely isolated. Every time she walked outside of that door, it would have been like she had her scarlet letter pinned on her. It would have had judgment from everybody facing her, and she would have come up against that again and again. I can't imagine carrying that jar with all the other women in the evenings and feeling that projected on her. Feeling like she's boxed into this identity that she doesn't get a choice in, that she has no say in. But this entire community has decided who she is, what she has done, has filled in blanks of her narrative for themselves, and now has decided to travel at high noon to get her water so that she can avoid any of that interaction. Her identity would have been wholly tied to her past, with no one extending any amount of grace towards her. So I get it. I get why she's there at noon. Arguably the worst time to be fetching water and carrying it back to her home. It's the safest time for her to leave her house, to have any glimpse of a reminder of who she is. They continue this dialogue, and she recognizes that he's a prophet, and so asks him a question, and it's something we see throughout the Gospels a lot. It's almost like a test, right? Like, I see that you're a prophet, but where should we really be worshiping? Because you Jews say we should worship here, and our people worship here. So what's the real answer? We see it with the Pharisees every time they encounter Jesus. We see it with any of the religious systems anytime they encounter Jesus. We know where the line is, Jesus, so why don't you tell us where you think the line is? And he's operating in a completely different way than any of our studies, our boxes, our lines are going to allow him to navigate. He's going to be outside of it every time. I feel like we've talked about it in here before. Anytime we draw a line in the sand and we say, this is what Christianity is, I can promise Jesus is on the other side of that line. Always with those on the margin, always the outcasts, and never in the center of power. Never with the people who are going to be oppressing others. Jesus is going to be on the other place of what we think we know. We have to embody our faith differently. He shares that soon salvation will come for all and that the location won't matter, whether it's this temple or that, a specific style of worship, a denomination, a certain church, a certain preacher. Insert whatever thing you want to insert into what it means to be at worship or at a church. It does not matter. All of that is going to fall away. All people will have access. The Spirit will move, and that God, that Spirit is moving, is a spirit of truth, a spirit of grace, a spirit of freedom. And God's followers will be embodying that spirit of truth. She knows of the coming Christ, the Messiah. And I love in this passage because Jesus just looks at her and plainly says, yeah, that's me. I'm the one you're talking about. I'm here. There's no dots that have to be connected. There's no equation that has to be put together. There's no interpretation of special coded language. It's just as simple as I am here. I'm the one you've been waiting for. I'm standing right in front of you. I'm looking at you. I am here. I am he. Right at that moment, the disciples arrive on scene. And one of the things I find fascinating in the passage is that it makes it really clear in John that none of the disciples shamed her or shamed Jesus for talking to her, right? I think if they hadn't have included this line that says, what do you want? Why are you speaking with her? It would have been really easy to assume that's what would have happened because of what that culture looked like and the way that males and females interacted within that culture. So I find it super fascinating that John wants to be super clear. No one said that. The disciples are walking up to her, and right in that moment, it says that she left her jar and she went back to the city. And I think part of that language is important because it would be really easy otherwise to assume she ran away because of the way she was treated in this moment. But it's really important to understand why she is being treated differently in this moment than anything she would have known. She's surrounded by Jesus and his disciples, all male, we assume at this point in the story, and nobody is casting any judgment or shame on her. It is absolutely a place of grace, acceptance. I do not think that when Jesus said, it's true that you don't have a husband right now, you've had 5. I don't think any of that was in an accusatory way. I don't think any of it was language that was shame on you, tisk tisk. I think all of it was just a statement of fact. And again, if we think back to the way that Jesus was probably presenting, it was in a least anxious presence. It was in a calm tone. And it was probably along the lines of, you're right. You don't have a husband. The man you're with right now, you're not married to. And you've had 5 husbands before that. I think what she is experiencing, she has never experienced in her life before. Because I think she is seeing grace and experiencing grace for the first time in her life. I think that this moment is pivotal for her and changes everything about how she views herself and how she views the community around her, how she views probably God and religion, because I can't imagine the religious institution was nice to her up to this point. Everything has shifted, and she leaves her jar by the well. And maybe I could go a little bit step further to say that she lays it at the feet of Jesus. This jar that up to this point, I think, wholly represents her identity of who she is. Because whether she wants that scarlet letter or not, she has faced it enough times that she has now altered how she is living her life to avoid the judgment and shame. And I think in doing so, whether she wanted to or not, she embraced an identity that was never meant for her. She started living into what other people said she was and who she was. And I think that this jar that she has been carrying at high noon to fill with water every day is a physical manifestation of that placed on her. She faces it every day, whether she is consciously aware of it or not, that this is who society has said I am, and these are the barriers I have to stay within, and I can't go outside of them. I have to continue in isolation, apart from community, because they are not going to accept me or welcome me or bring me back into the fold. And not to mention, y'all, we don't know why she got divorced. That culture was not friendly for women. She could not initiate that on her own. That's not something she could have gone and said, hey, I'd like a divorce, please, 5 times. Other people have put her in this situation. So I feel like her putting this jar down, laying this at the feet of Jesus is something bigger than those words in that sentence. This is a pivotal moment for her. She lays everything she knows at the feet, and she runs back to town. She leaves it all behind because she has experienced radical grace being poured out on her. She has been seen. She is known. She's accepted. No ties to her prior or past marriage status or whatever it is. I'm using her examples, but we can fill in the blank with our own. Just grace, unending grace poured out on her exactly where she is, with no expectations or stipulations for her to change in any way. Just grace poured out, covering her from head to toe. She runs back to town. This has shifted everything. And she doesn't just run away from it, because I think there would be a temptation to do that too. To say, I don't know what to do with this. I don't know how to handle this grace, this acceptance, this interaction I've had with this person, with this who I think is the Messiah. And so I'm just going to go back home and process for a little bit on my own. I'm going to hide away from that because I don't know what to do with it. But that's not what happens. What happens is she runs back to town, to the very people that she has been avoiding for decades of her life, and says, you have got to come meet this guy. Y'all, he listed out everything I've done. He told me about who I'm living with now. He told me about all my, right? And she becomes somebody who is testifying, a missionary, if you will, to her hometown, which we all know that is the hardest place to go back and share any kind of transformation with, because they see you as 16-year-old high school Sarah, right? She goes back to them and says, y'all have got to come down to the well right now and meet this guy. And y'all, the weirdest thing is they go. They trust her and follow her. Now, granted, there's probably some in the crowd that are like, crazy Sarah's up to something again. Let's go see what it is. But some of them see that something has shifted in her. She has avoided talking to them for decades of her life because of the judgment and shame and box that she was put in. And now she is going to them and inviting them into something that has changed her, and that starts to be contagious. When we experience grace in that way, something shifts in us. Other people see it when they know us well, and it starts to make them ask questions. It starts to make them think, what is going on in her life? What is that transformation that he is experiencing? I am curious and want to know more about that. Because there's a freedom that comes with it. People can see that burdens and weights are dropped off of you. And it may not be a direct question of, tell me about this man Jesus who changed your life. But it may be like, hey, I'm noticing that you seem to have a lighter step. I'm noticing that deadlines around projects don't seem to carry the same weight. I'm noticing that it doesn't feel like advancement is as important to you in this as it is the way you treat people. Because all of this starts to change the way that you are living your day-to-day life. It starts to become something that you are embodying without having all the words for, without having all the language or the seminary studies. We went there. I don't know that it gave me all the right language, right? There's something that starts to bubble up in you that changes before you understand what's happening. And I think a lot of times it's only in looking back that you are able to gain language to point out where it was that God worked. Where it was that God's grace showed up in your life. Where it was that other people in community came alongside you and spoke truth over you. And now you're able to embody that and live that in a way, and you start to have a new way of thinking. But it is only by acting first. We cannot think our way into a new way of acting. We must act our way into a new way of thinking. I want to be clear in part of this. I'm not saying that then that means there's no accountability for people and that all sin is fine as long as we have grace. That's not what grace is about. But I am saying that maybe the judging should be left to Christ. I am saying that maybe the rest of us should be creating a community that's safe enough that we can all walk out our journeys of faith authentically. We're back to Matt's point at the beginning when someone says, hey, you're looking great, but like where's life screwed up? We can answer honestly. And we'd say, this is what I'm struggling with, because we know that these people are safe people and that they're going to extend grace and they're going to walk alongside us while God straightens it out. They're going to carry stuff alongside of us and with us, but this would not be a place of judgment. This would not be a place that says to be a Christian looks like this box, or to use Matt's example, this, size 3T t-shirt that you have to force on in order to be a Christian. That something different would happen in our community. And y'all, I know I hit on this. I think it's my thing. Like every preacher has like their thing that they hit on every time they talk. In Genesis, it did not start with sin. It did not start with, you now have to be kicked out of the garden. It started with God creating everything and calling it good, and then God creating humanity and saying, you are very good. That is where our story starts. With the image of God on us saying, you are worthy exactly as you are. Exactly as I have created you to be. And yes, sin has entered the world, and there is now brokenness, but that image of God is still on you, is still deeply within you. And I think that when we encounter this kind of radical grace, it reminds us of who we were created to be, of the worth that we have in God in Christ, and that no identities placed on us by any institutions or communities is going to hold. It's all going to burn away. You are very good. You are worthy. You are loved by God. You have grace poured upon you, and it changes everything about how you live and act, and maybe not all at once, but certainly in small ways. Because when you've encountered that kind of grace, it becomes contagious. It becomes something you have to share about. It becomes something that other people notice and that changes lives and entire communities. It creates a new way of thinking within us, a new way of being, and the only way that we can get started on that journey is to embrace grace, to start acting in it and let it change us and the world. Amen. Can I pray for us? And then we can. God, I thank you so much for who you created us to be, that where we sit right now, we are worthy, we are good, and that you don't have any stipulations on us, even while you still call us into something more. Help us to embody grace in a drastic way that changes who we are, changes the way that we act, and changes the way we think. Help us to speak your truth out of love, to come alongside others in that same spirit, and just be with us, Lord, as we journey throughout our weeks. In your name I pray. Amen.